A major health system loses hundreds of employees in the wake of a vaccine mandate. What is ahead for healthcare as we move into the COVID-flu combo? We're starting to see redistricting maps. If you wanted a grid, it's not quite what you'd hoped. And we'll meet the challenger for Detroit City Clerk, Denzel McCampbell. Today is Sunday, October 10th, 2021, and this is Flashpoint. Hi, welcome to Flashpoint on this October 10th. So happy anniversary, babe. And it's good to have you with us this morning. I had hoped today we would be hosting a debate of sorts between Detroit City Clerk Janice Winfrey and the challenger in her race, Denzel McCampbell. Now, 4 years ago, Winfrey was here to go one-on-one with now Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist, and I was eager to reboot the same kind of give and take with this year's election, now just 3 weeks away. But Winfrey has made it clear she has no intention of appearing on the program this year, so instead we will meet her opponent a little later on this morning. It's also time for us to get another update on the progress of the Michigan Redistricting Commission. We now have a few working maps to look over. Now, many had hoped this commission would rid us of those strangely serpentine districts that seem to define gerrymandering. But lo and behold, these aren't exactly squares and rectangles either. We'll talk about that coming up. But up first, last week, Henry Ford Health System announced they were parting company with some 400 employees who refused to go along with the system's COVID vaccine mandate. We already know it's getting tough to hire nursing home workers and nurses. Can a hospital system afford to lose that many employees? On the other hand, if there are employees who refuse to get a vaccine in the middle of a pandemic that, of course, lives quite acutely in our nation's hospitals, can they afford to keep them? It's all today on Flashpoint. Well, any business that decided to institute a vaccine mandate knew that they were doing so taking a bit of a risk, that they might lose an employee or two, or more than that. We got the news this past week that one of the major health systems in Southeast Michigan was losing some 400 employees over the vaccine mandate. Let's talk about it with the COO of the Henry Ford Health System, and that's Bob Riney, back with us again on Flashpoint. Bob, I appreciate the time today. Tell me a little bit about, was this about what you expected? More losses, fewer than you expected? How did it turn out for you?
You know, Devin, any loss is less than I would have wanted, or more than I would have wanted. Sure. But out of 33,000 employees, the fact that we ended up with 400 that we just couldn't reach an agreement with on complying with the vaccine mandate is something that I'm very proud of. As I mentioned, I wish it could be zero, but it really means that 99% of our team members found their way to supporting this leading cause that we've taken on. And that's our fundamental belief that we owe it to ourselves and to our communities to be safe, and that the vaccination process and vaccines are the key to that safety. So I'm very happy with the outcome overall. You know,
Bob, for a lot of businesses, I think it's a tough call whether or not they want to institute a vaccine mandate. I've talked to some business owners who are already so strapped for employees, they don't feel like they can do that. But if you're a system that is made up for healthcare, made up of hospitals, my hunch is you didn't feel like you had much of a choice but to institute a mandate. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. And I believe that tough calls don't always happen at opportunistic times, but you have to live your values. You know, you have to live your values. And, you know, our values were really surrounded by the fact that we believe vaccines are the way out of this just horrid 18 months that we have been spending. And we knew it wasn't going to be popular. We knew that we would be taking some risk at a time, as you said, that the workforce shortages are across all industries and across the country. But we decided we can't pause on our beliefs and our values simply because it's going to be harder for us in the short run.
As we've watched a couple of things develop, obviously the Delta variant has led to a lot of breakthrough cases that run right through the protections offered by the vaccine. Has that made you more impassioned about the vaccine, or more along the side of, well, it's the best we can do?
No, it's actually made me more passionate about the efficacy of the vaccine, because there are breakthrough cases, but breakthrough cases are happening because variants are allowed to have life and to grow. And that is because we still have such a huge number of unvaccinated people. So it's not a surprise that these variants will find ways to, affect the vaccines that have been put in place. But the facts are the facts. The vast majority of cases are still unvaccinated individuals. And of those breakthrough cases, the absolute majority of those cases are mild and are not requiring hospitalization and certainly not resulting in deaths. So to me, this is just further evidence that the vaccines work, but it's further evidence that until we shrink this gap between unvaccinated and vaccinated, we leave ourselves exposed.
Any one healthcare worker, though, who chooses not to get the vaccine almost seems to have an exponential impact, because those who are against the vaccine or just against the vaccine mandates like to point to how many healthcare workers have decided. They're like, these are the people who know, and if they're not getting the vaccine, then maybe we need to rethink this.
Yeah, I think that's a convenient place for people to land. But at the end of the day, healthcare has employees that come with all different kinds of beliefs, just like the general population. I think people should concentrate on the fact that even without mandates, 75, 80, 85% of healthcare workers were first in line to get vaccinated. And then with the mandates, we were able to move that up to 99%. So the vast majority of healthcare workers who've done their research reached the conclusion that this is the way to protect themselves and their family.
There's, of course, I think the cliched view of this is that it's people on the far right who are the anti-vaxxers, but you've got a hospital that sits right in the middle of Detroit where the vaccine rates in the city of Detroit are deplorably low. What can we do about that?
What we have found at this point is that the key to getting the unvaccinated vaccinated is one-on-one conversations, because you really have to get at their particular fear or apprehension. And oftentimes it doesn't fall in the stereotypical box that we might think. It's maybe about political affiliation. It may be about a history or an adverse reaction to some vaccine they had in the past. But we're finding all sorts of reasons. And one of the things that we have found very effective is helping people figure out a way to save face when they originally took a position that they were against the vaccine, and they've now come to realize that it is what they want to do, but perhaps they're having trouble going back and showing that change of view to a family member or to a colleague or to a peer. And it's been surprising to us, helping people through even some of those conversations is making a huge difference.
Lastly, Bob, tell me about your outlook here as we move into an arena that I think a lot of people are concerned, and that's this collision of flu season with COVID season. Our flu vaccines are available, but since we didn't really have a flu season last year, we don't really know how effective this year's vaccine is going to be, right?
We don't, but what we do know is that the combination of influenza vaccines and mask wearing during high season, regardless of what your views of that, it created almost a non-event last year with influenza. So we are really encouraging people, because I'll tell you, our hospitals are full right now. They are filled, and it's not because of COVID. COVID represents a portion, about 15% of our admissions, but the vast majority is other issues, people that have really needs they need to be taken care of. And I dread the thought of a heavy influenza season coming on top of this heavy demand. And so get your influenza vaccine, and if you're eligible for the booster, get it as well.
You got it. Always good to talk to you. I appreciate the update, Bob. Good luck going forward, and thanks for the time today on Flashpoint.
Thank you, Devin.
You bet. We'll take a quick break. We come back, we'll talk about the latest developments on redistricting in Michigan. This is Flashpoint on Local 4.
With DraftKings Sportsbook's latest offer, new customers can bet just $1 on any NFL game and win $100 if any point is scored. A chip shot field goal? You win. A TD pass? You win. A sack in the offense's own end zone, thereby resulting in a safety awarded to the defense? Yeah, you win. So download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. Sign up with the promo code. Bet $1 to win $100 if any point is scored, and make it rain with an official sports betting partner of the NFL.
It's time to fall into savings with Karastan. As an exclusive retailer of Karastan, we are proud to offer the finest carpet, hardwood, and luxury vinyl floor in the industry. Through October 26th, take advantage of a $1,000 rebate and special financing on all Karastan products. So get inspired, elevate your decor with sophisticated designs and remarkable quality. And don't miss your chance to live beautifully. Visit our showroom and experience the beauty of Karastan.
Jason Carr is a very wise soul.
Whether it's music or cars or peanut butter and jelly.
He is a walking Google.
We're both so nostalgic about things from our childhoods, which was a long time ago.
Oh, do you remember like this rock band from like 1984? And I'm like, no, I'm sorry.
You're like, can't even be true. And then you Google it and you're like, yeah, he's right again.
He can just call up this information so quickly. It's really cool.
Welcome back. Let's again check in on the progress of the Michigan Redistricting Commission. Incredibly important work that'll shape Michigan politics for a long time. In fact, the creation of this commission and its reliance on everyday citizens could end up being a model for other states, you'd presume. There have been some bumps in the road. We've talked about those, but now we have the first maps to look over. Let's talk about that with two reporters following this commission closely. Sergio Martinez Beltran from Bridge Magazine and Ben Solis from Gongwer News Service. Ben, let me start with you. And I don't know how many of us thought we would see a grid or boxes and rectangles. It seldom works that way. But give me your thumbnail thoughts on these first maps that we've seen as they've been developed now that we're coming up to public comment on a lot of them.
Certainly. Well, they've been working on these for, about a month and a half now. So a lot of work has gone into it. But, what we're seeing now is a holdup as they're trying to reconfigure some of these maps based on partisan fairness. They thought that they were mostly done. And after a partisan fairness look last week, they, presumed that they had less work to do than they thought. But now this week, we're learning that there's quite a bit more work to do, especially on the state house map. They have the Senate map pretty much done. And the congressional map, they're still doing a few tweaks here and there. But the state house map is really giving them some grief. And we're hoping to have that wrapped up here soon. So a lot more work to be done. Yeah, there is. Sergio, I find myself a little confused about the way that I expect the commissioners to look at this. Because now, of course, the political world is looking at the ramifications. And I'm wondering, should the commissioners be worried about the politics of it? Or should they be agnostic and just trying to figure out which communities belong together in voting blocks and which ones don't? Or am I being naive?
No, I guess it depends who you ask. If you ask the politicos of the world, they'll say yes, they should be paying attention to how parties fare here. But the reality is that you're talking, and what you're getting at is the tension between criterias, right? The commission has to follow a set of criterias. One of the top criteria is communities of interest, which is the communities that share cultural, social, or any other similarities, right? And we've heard from a lot of those communities. And the idea is that a commission draw districts that benefit them and not necessarily benefit a party. But now, like Ben mentioned, with the partisan fairness analysis, we're seeing that some maps are leaning Democratic, most maps are truly leaning Republican, and the commission is paying attention to that.
If it's interesting, Ben, we have three commissioners who themselves have looked at the maps and said that they're worried about black voting voices being diluted too much. I guess that's pretty concerning.
It's a concern, and this is not just from their own, viewpoint. They've collected a lot of public input in the beginning and also near the end of this process, which we're far from the end of it, but at least this mapping phase. With a lot of Detroit residents looking at the maps that have been produced and saying, you really didn't follow our communities of interest considerations. You have diluted the vote, it seems, based on Voting Rights Act concerns. There were very packed Democratic black districts in Detroit, which appeared to be by design from the 2011 reapportionment. And they were, tasked with kind of unpacking those. And in the process, they created maps that, have the potential of someone who doesn't live in Detroit representing pieces of Detroit, this potentially. So that's a concern for them. And the commission is cognizant of that. I think, as Sergio mentioned, there's now this natural conflict between some of these criterion. And they're at loggerheads about whether they should be focused more on the partisan fairness of the map or preserving these communities of interest. And they're getting mixed input, too.
Yeah. Sergio, it's funny. I find myself wondering, we all sort of longed for, I think we had an idealism built into the idea of average everyday citizens taking this over instead of those who were completely politically minded and lawmakers in Lansing. And yet maybe this whole thing from the get-go is a fool's errand because you're going to make people mad no matter how you draw these lines, right? Isn't it impossible to make everybody happy?
And I think the commission is realizing that now, right? They've been hearing from hundreds and hundreds of people in public comment. We've seen an increase, by the way, in the number of people who show up at the meetings and express their feelings about the maps. So I think now is when they are realizing that not everyone loves them and that not everyone is super happy with them at this point, and that maybe they have to be okay with that because at the end of the day, they were tasked with drawing fair maps and not necessarily make everyone happy. The interesting thing, though, is that now they're receiving heat from both sides. They're receiving complaints from the Republican side, which has been complaining about this commission since before its conception, but also from the Democratic side and progressive groups who have been complaining about their processes as well.
Yeah. Ben, we've known that we're obviously losing a congressional seat the next time around, and this big game of congressional musical chairs, we were going to end up with two incumbents, perhaps having to fight it out among each other, the rare two incumbent race. Have we been able to get a sense yet? You talked about the congressional maps still being worked on. Do we have a sense yet of where the fault lines are going to be and whose seat is most likely to be the one that's gone?
Yeah, I mean, there's some melding of districts going on in Metro Detroit, but I think the big ones that you'll see are between, Republicans. You got Fred Upton's district that, is kind of growing a little bit. And so that might box out Huizenga. So they got to figure out, what they're going to do. It's not a requirement that, if you get drawn into someone's district that you move. It's politically advantageous for you if you want to, be able to get your seat back. But because we are losing a seat, one of them potentially has to go. And we have yet to see what that is going to look like finally, because obviously, more changes are coming down the pike.
Yeah. Sergio, I've only got about 30 seconds left. Is it too early I mentioned that the rest of the country is watching this. Is it too early for us to decide whether this is a model for others to do it? Or has this been a pretty good process?
I think it's 50-50. It's definitely a model on democracy and transparency in a way, but we don't know if the maps are going to end up being more fair. So I think it's too early.
Yeah. Yeah. Sergio and Ben, thanks so much for the update. I know you guys have been working tirelessly on this. Thanks for being here, and I hope we'll talk to you again about it soon on Flashpoint. We come back, we'll dig into the race for Detroit City Clerk with the challenger to Janice Winfrey. This is Flashpoint on Local 4.
HAP has been part of the Michigan community since 1960, and we're here with Medicare Advantage plans designed just for you. With benefits like dental, hearing aids, over-the-counter allowance, transportation, travel coverage, and telehealth. Call 888-889-2655 to learn more and get your free Medicare benefits guide. Hurry, Medicare enrollment ends December 7th. HAP Medicare Advantage. Made in Michigan, for Michigan.
It's bigger than big. It's our biggest Columbus Day sale ever at Gardner White. Save up to 70% off on our huge selection of top name brand mattresses, like Gel Queen Memory Foam mattresses, $195. Serta Perfect Sleeper, just $299. Nobody can beat Gardner White with more free extras. Free TVs, a free power base with every mattress, and free same-day delivery. This is why we are Detroit's #1 mattress store. Our biggest Columbus Day sale ever. Going on now at Gardner White.
Fall in Metro Detroit. Yeah, we know. Oh, that's nice. But
did we just lose power?
Fall weather events, big and small, can really affect your life. That's why the local forecasters are here. Don't let severe weather make you feel powerless. Count on Local 4, Click on Detroit, and the Local Forecasters app to keep you informed all season long.
Questions I get asked all the time. Should I watch the morning show on Monday? Heck yeah. Why? This awesome nurse is TikToking her way out of a huge problem. How? You have to watch to find out. 1. Monday morning at 6:30 a.m. on Local 4 News Today.
Well, I mentioned earlier I had hoped to host a conversation between the two candidates for Detroit City Clerk, but the incumbent has declined to take part. So let's meet the challenger, Denzel McCampbell. Denzel, I really appreciate your being here, but I'm curious about your decision to run this time around. There have been plenty of problems over the years in Detroit elections. We all know that. But the election of 2020 has had to withstand all kinds of scrutiny in court, and it did that. So is this the best time to complain about elections in the city?
Thanks for having me on, Devin. I appreciate the conversation. Absolutely, the 2020 election, there was not any fraud. And unfortunately, we had, attacks on the election and really attacks on voting rights, I would say, especially for Black and brown communities. But the reason why I'm running is not so much just about the 2020 elections. As you mentioned, there's been plenty of issues with our elections in the city of Detroit. And really around participation, I continue to get complaints from folks around polling locations not open on time, precincts being moved with no notice, the lack of education that we're having right now in this current election. We have 3 ballot proposals and not enough information is out there. So there's still deep issues with the Detroit City Clerk's office, and I'm running because I believe we need new energy and it's time for a change. We also, though, knew that COVID had a lot to do with problems in 2020 as far as staffing of elections, and that when you end up with not enough volunteers, not enough poll workers, you are going to end up with a problem. I mean, don't we have to chalk up some of that to the way that we were living our lives in 2020? When we look at what's going on with our polling workers and the staffing, we need a Detroit City Clerk who will actually be out in the community making these issues known, right? It just can't be after the fact and excuses. We need a Detroit City Clerk who will be proactive with civic engagement groups to amp up that recruiting, right? We need a Detroit City Clerk office that will do more robust training to make sure that our poll workers have the information that they need. So yes, we have these factors in, but Detroiters deserve elected officials who will be forthcoming, who will be transparent, and will work in partnership. And I don't believe we've had enough of that out of the Detroit City Clerk's office. I'm going to assume part of the reason, speaking of transparency, I'm going to assume part of the reason why Janice Winfrey has declined to appear is recently it came to light that she and her husband have had they're behind on paying some taxes. A lot of Detroiters are behind on paying taxes. She's apparently making good on the payment program she has, but I guess I'm curious as to whether or not you think that that's an issue, or are you setting that aside and sticking with what goes on in the clerk's office? When that news came out, I mentioned that I'm first and foremost that I believe that she should just be transparent, again, transparent, forthcoming with Detroiters about these issues as a public official. I'm not going to use her personal finances against her, but Detroiters deserve to have their public officials be very straightforward, especially when we're talking about tax dollars. They are the very tax dollars that she is over as Detroit City Clerk, because some of those tax dollars were city tax dollars. But so I'm just coming forth as being transparent. I'm glad that it does appear that she's taken care of, and I hope she continues to have that transparency as this goes on. We look over your history, your work history, your resume, if you will. You've been a community activist for some time, working on social justice issues. You are the communications director for Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib. There's not a ton on your resume, though, that suggests a ton of election experience. Where are you going to get that, and how do you manage to turn that into your favor then, as someone who doesn't have maybe a whole lot of experience with voting and balloting? So I would actually say that I actually got my start in community organizing with voting rights and election protection. So I started with the Michigan Election Coalition, and I would be one of the people to recruit legal observers and non-legal observers to deploy out to polling locations when there were issues at the polling location. So I know Michigan election law. I was part of the early planning group with the Promote the Vote effort, which expanded ballot access, and also part of early redistricting reform efforts. And in Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib's office, I did do a lot of advising on voting rights legislation. And I'll say also, Devin, very recently, I managed a $30 million project again across 8 states when it came to educating folks on how to vote safely during COVID-19, and also pushing back on disinformation and misinformation that we saw and will continue to see in elections. So I do have a lot of experience when it comes to elections. I know the election law. I've been engaged with poll workers. I've done trainings, the similar trainings that poll workers get. So I'm going to bring that experience to the Detroit City Clerk's office, along with my community organizing skills, because again, we need to make sure that we're engaging community organizations to increase civic education, to amp up turnout, but to also ensure that there's an active feedback loop with our residents to make sure that we're actually servicing them in the correct way.
Before we run out of time, I want to make sure I ask you about the effort in Lansing right now to make it, I think a lot of people think it would be tougher for Detroiters to vote if we start demanding photo IDs, driver's licenses, and the like. Now, it's doubtful that some of these things are going to get past the governor's desk, but we do understand the effort that is going on in Michigan and elsewhere on making it, it depends on your point of view. Some would say tougher to vote, some would say ensuring correct elections.
Here's what I'll say. The bottom line is that our elections are already safe and secure. We have laws in place that make sure that there's not election fraud happening. It's been proven that election fraud is very rare, and it's not really happening in the way that folks that are pushing these initiatives are claiming. This is not to actually secure our elections. These are folks that I would say that are upset about the 2020 election and are trying to ensure that some folks vote and other folks do not, and the folks that don't vote their way do not vote. This effort, I'm deeply opposed to it, and they're gonna, it's still legal in the state of Michigan to have petitioners lie to folks when they're circulating petitions and deceive them. And I really stress that voters should read the petitions that are being put in front of them and know that this is a voter suppression effort.
And Denzel, I'm afraid I'm out of time. We got to leave it there, but I really appreciate you being with me this morning on Flashpoint, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk again here before we head to Election Day. Thanks so much for the time.
Thank you, Devin.
You bet. That's going to do it for us this morning. Thanks so much for being here. Mitch Albom's Heart of Detroit coming up next, and then it's Meet the Press. We'll see you next time on Flashpoint.